The sky over London was still dark when Prince William opened his eyes. The room was quiet, but his heart was loud. It beat fast, like drums in a parade. This was not a normal day. This was the day he would become king. For a few moments he lay. Still, the air felt heavy. His body felt stiff, like it knew something big was coming. William blinked and stared at the ceiling. Today was the day people had waited for their whole lives. Today, the world would be watching him. Beside him, Catherine was already awake. She had been up since 4 a.m. Her hands were cold but steady as she reached for his. She didn't speak, but her touch said everything. "You're not alone." Had waited for this day for years. But now that it had come, it felt unreal. William turned his head and looked at her. She gave him a soft smile, even though her eyes looked tired. They were both feeling the same thing: excitement, nerves, and a deep sense of duty. Downstairs, the royal staff were already busy. William could hear soft footsteps, voices, and the clinking of dishes. The house was full of people making sure everything was perfect. There could be no mistakes. No, not today. A knock came at the door. It was his private secretary. "Breakfast is ready, sir, and the styling team will be here in 30 minutes. William nodded. I sat up, then stood slowly, walking to the tall window. Outside, the early morning light was just beginning to show. Mist hung low over the gardens. Beyond the gates he could see crowds and photographers already waiting. They were here to see him. His chest tightened. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled the curtains wider. Cameras with long lenses were pointed at the house. Even from this far away, he could feel their eyes. Catherine came to stand beside him and put her arms around his waist. "You're ready for this?" she whispered. He didn't reply, but her words gave him strength. They went downstairs. The dining room looked beautiful. The table was set with shining plates and fine teacups. The smell of warm pastries and tea filled the air. But William wasn't hungry. His stomach was too full of nerves. Catherine urged him to eat something small, just toast and tea. She knew how long the day would be. The ceremony alone would last hours. Then there would be speeches, receptions, and the famous appearance on the palace balcony. Their 3 children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, came running in. They were still in their pajamas, smiling and full of energy. They didn't fully understand the meaning of the day, but they knew it was special. George asked, "Is the crown heavy, Daddy?" William laughed for the first time that morning. "Think so, yes," Charlotte said. "You're going to look very handsome," Louis asked. "Will there be cake?" William smiled and pulled them all into a big hug. For a moment, he forgot about the cameras and the ceremony. This moment right here in the dining room reminded him why he was doing this. It wasn't just about wearing a crown. It was about leading for his family. And for everyone else's family, too. After breakfast, William walked alone to his private study. It was a small, quiet room filled with books and photos. There was a photo of his mother, Princess Diana, and another of his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth. He sat down at the desk and looked at their faces. Missed them both. He picked up his speech and read it again. He'd worked hard on it. The words talked about duty, hope, and the future. But even now, he wasn't sure if they were enough. He wanted people to feel something when he spoke. He closed his eyes and imagined his grandmother sitting across from him. He could almost hear her voice saying, "You've got this. Be strong. Serve with your heart." A soft knock on the door pulled him back to the present. "Sir, the styling team is here." William stood and took a deep breath. It was time to become the man the world had been waiting for. The heavy doors of Clarence's house opened slowly as Prince William stepped outside. The cold morning air hit his face, but he barely noticed. His heart was beating fast. The world was waiting. The sky above was a soft gray, and the sound of distant cheers filled the air today. Every camera in the country was pointed at him. Every eye, every phone, every television. This was not a movie. This was not a dream. It was real. He was about to be crowned King of England. William moved toward the black royal car waiting at the front. He was dressed now in his full coronation. Robes deep, blue velvet with gold embroidery, shining under the cloudy light. Each thread had been sewn with care. His stylist, Sarah, had helped him dress slowly, making sure everything was perfect. When he first looked at himself in the mirror, he hardly believed what he saw. The man staring back at him looked strong, proud, and royal. But inside, William still felt like the same boy who had once watched his mother wave to crowds from a palace window. Catherine followed close behind, dressed in a beautiful sapphire blue gown that matched his robes. She held the hands of their 3 children. George walked tall and serious. Charlotte smiled gently, and little Louis looked around in wonder. They were dressed in formal clothes, too, looking like a royal picture come to life. As the family entered their cars, the crowd outside the gates cheered louder. Flags waved in the air. Some people held signs with messages like, "Long live the King, and we love you, William." There were faces of every age, many smiling, some crying. People had come from all parts of the country, and even from other countries, just to be part of this moment. Inside the car, William sat quietly, his hands folded on his lap. His robe was so heavy he had to sit straight and still. He looked out the tinted window and saw the streets of London lined with people. They stood behind barriers, shoulder to shoulder, waving and calling his name. The car drove slowly, followed by the vehicles carrying Catherine and the children. Policemen stood along the roads, keeping everyone safe. TV cameras followed every second of the journey. Reporters spoke into microphones, describing the scene to the millions watching around the world. William felt the weight of history sitting. Beside him, every king before him had made this journey. His grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, had traveled this same road in 1953. Now it was his turn. He thought of her how calm and graceful she had always been. He hoped he could be the same as. The car turned a corner. Westminster Abbey came into view. The grand building stood tall, its ancient towers touching the sky. The closer they came, the louder the cheers grew. William looked at the crowd again. So many faces, so many hopes. He took a deep breath. The car stopped at the main entrance of the Abbey. The sound outside was deafening. Thousands of people were shouting his name, waving flags, and taking photos. His door opened, and for a moment everything seemed to pause. Then William stepped out. The red carpet lay before him. Cameras flashed. The crowd roared. Reporters shouted. But all he heard was the wind and the quiet voice in his head telling him to stay strong. He turned back and saw Catherine and the children stepping out of their car. She looked at him and smiled. That smile was all he needed. Inside the Abbey, the mood changed. It was quiet, serious, almost holy. The thick stone walls seemed to hold the air still. Hundreds of guests had already taken their seats, world leaders, famous people, royal family members. Everyone stood when William entered. He could see his father, King Charles, sitting in the front row, dressed in his own ceremonial robes. Their eyes met, and the king gave him a small nod. There was pride in that nod, and love. The Archbishop of Canterbury stood waiting at the front. He had practiced this moment many times with William. But now it was real. The Archbishop leaned close and said, "Are you ready, Your Royal Highness?" William nodded. Yes. He began to walk slowly down the long aisle. Every step echoed through the Abbey. Every guest turned to look at him. Some were smiling. Some had tears in their eyes. The gold on his robes caught the light from the tall stained glass windows, making him look like a figure from a storybook. Halfway down the aisle, he passed Catherine and the children. Charlotte was crying softly. George sat straight, proud and calm. Louis waved at his father and whispered, "Go, Daddy." William's chest filled with emotion. The moment was finally here. In just a short time, he would wear the crown. Not for power, not for glory, but for duty, for love, for the people. The moment Prince William reached the altar, everything became silent. Not just quiet, but deeply, powerfully silent. Even the children in the front row stopped moving. The air inside Westminster Abbey felt thick with emotion.
Wow.
This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. William stood tall. His hands were steady, though his heart still beat fast. All the months of planning, the long rehearsals, the pressure, none of it mattered now. He was here. He was ready. The Archbishop of Canterbury stepped forward, holding an old prayer book in his hands. His voice was calm but strong as he began the ancient ceremony. The same words had been spoken for centuries, each time a new king or queen was crowned. William listened carefully, nodding at the right moments, but his thoughts drifted for a second. He remembered standing in this same abbey years ago at his mother's funeral. He remembered walking behind her coffin. That day was full of sadness, but today was full of hope. He looked out at the crowd, saw faces from around the world, leaders, friends, family. But he only focused on a few: his father, King Charles, his wife, Catherine, sitting quietly and watching. With wide eyes as the ceremony continued, William was asked to take sacred oaths. His voice was clear and firm as he promised to serve the people of the United Kingdom and the nations of the Commonwealth. He promised to protect the church, uphold the law, and always put the people first. These were not just words to him. They were promises he would carry in his heart every day as king. When the time came for the anointing, a special screen was brought forward. It hid William from the crowd for a few minutes. This part of the ceremony was private and spiritual, holy. Oil was used to bless his hands, chest, and head. This act showed that being king was not just about wearing a crown, it was about being chosen to serve. Behind the screen, William closed his eyes. He didn't speak, but he prayed quietly. He asked for strength, for wisdom, and for kindness. He thought about his grandmother and how she had always led with calmness and grace. He hoped to be like her. He hoped to make her proud. When the screen was removed, the mood in the abbey changed again. It was time for the crown. A golden cushion was brought forward. On it sat the crown, heavy, shining, and full of history. It had once been worn by kings and queens before him. Now it was his turn. The archbishop carefully lifted the crown with both hands. The choir began to sing softly. The air was still. No one moved. William knelt as the archbishop gently placed the crown on his head. For a moment, no one breathed. Then the bells of Westminster Abbey rang out loud and strong. The choir's voices rose higher. Trumpets sounded from the corners of the great hall. Outside, cannons fired in celebration. The sound of cheering crowds filled the streets of London. Inside the abbey, everyone stood and began to clap. Some guests had tears running down their faces. Catherine wiped her eyes as she looked at her husband, her king. George stood up a little taller. Charlotte smiled brightly. Louis clapped and shouted, "That's my daddy." William stood slowly. The crown sat heavy on his head, but he felt steady. His eyes scanned the room. He nodded once, a small but powerful sign. He was not just wearing the crown, he was accepting the responsibility that came with it. The final part of the ceremony included a special blessing and a prayer. William joined the archbishop at the front. His voice was strong as he read a short message he had written. Himself, he spoke about duty, hope, and service. He thanked the people for their trust. He promised to serve with honesty, humility, and heart. The speech was short, but it touched everyone. It didn't sound like a politician. It sounded like a father, a husband, a son, and a man who loved his country. As the ceremony ended, the guests rose to their feet. Music filled the abbey once again. William turned to walk down the aisle, this time as a crowned king. He passed by Catherine and the children. They looked up at him with love and pride, gave them a small smile, the kind of smile only family understands. The doors of Westminster Abbey slowly opened. The bright light outside poured in. Waiting beyond those doors were thousands of cheering people, in a future that was just beginning. The doors of Westminster Abbey opened wide. The new king stepped into the sunlight. The crowd outside saw him and erupted. Cheers filled the streets. Flags waved. Hands reached out. People were crying, clapping, singing, and shouting his name. The sound was like a wave crashing through London. It was not just loud, it was full of love. Prince William now, King William, stood at the top of the steps. The crown on his head shimmered under the daylight. His royal robe flowed behind him. He looked out at the thousands of people who had waited all night just to see this moment. He raised one hand and waved. The response was even louder. Some people cried openly. Many held up their phones, trying to record history.
Yes.
Others held signs that read, "Long live King William, and we love our king." The faces in the crowd were filled with joy, emotion, and pride. Catherine soon joined him, looking elegant and calm. Her sapphire dress sparkled in the light. George, Charlotte, and Louis stood by her side. The royal family stood together at the top of the steps, and for a moment it felt like the whole world stopped to admire them. Inside the royal cars, the family prepared for the grand procession back to Buckingham Palace. The golden state coach was waiting for them. It was pulled by strong white horses and guarded by soldiers in bright red uniforms. Everything looked like a scene from a fairy tale. As King William stepped into the coach, Catherine followed with the children. The ride through London began. The streets were lined with people as far as the eye could see. The crowd waved British flags and tossed flower petals in the air. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, hoping to get a better view. Elders smiled. Through tears, some people held pictures of Queen Elizabeth and Princess Diana, holding them up with pride and love. Inside the coach, William looked out of the window quietly. He didn't speak for a long time. He was thinking not about the crown, but about the people. About his mother, about the promise he had made in his heart to serve. His eyes filled with emotion, but he did not cry. He smiled. Catherine gently took his hand. "They love you," she whispered. He nodded. "I hope I can make them proud." When the royal family arrived at Buckingham Palace, the cheering started again. The gates opened, and the coach rolled into the courtyard. The staff was already in place. Everything had been timed perfectly. Soon, William and his family walked on to the famous royal balcony. The moment everyone had waited for. The crowd below saw them, and the roar was incredible. It echoed through the city like thunder. The new king stood in the middle, holding Catherine's hand. George stood proudly beside his father. Charlotte waved sweetly to the crowd. Louis, full of energy, pointed at the sky. Then came the flyover. Dozens of planes from the Royal Air Force flew above the palace in perfect formation. Red, white, and blue smoke filled the sky. People cheered, laughed, and cried. William looked up and smiled. Even the sky was celebrating. As the planes passed, William looked out at the sea of people. They weren't just cheering for a king, they were cheering for hope, for family, for a future. He turned to Catherine. "This is bigger than us," he said. She nodded, her eyes soft. "Yes, but it starts with us." Later, when the day had quieted and the crowds had gone, William stood. Alone in the palace study, he had taken off the crown. He had removed the robe. Now he was just William again's husband, father-son. He looked at the framed photo of his mother on the desk. He touched it gently. "I did it, ma'am," he whispered. "I hope you're proud." Catherine entered the room. She walked up behind him and rested her chin on his shoulder. "You were amazing today." He turned and held her hand. "We were amazing." They stood there in silence, listening to the ticking clock. For the first time in days, the house felt calm. William looked out the window at the dark sky over London. It was quiet now, but earlier, it had been full of voices, thousands of voices calling out his name. He knew that being king would not be easy. There would be hard days, tough choices, challenges ahead. But he also knew something else he would. Never walk alone. He had his family, he had the people. And now he had the crown not for power, but for purpose, and that made all the difference.